Sometimes the most important thing about an article is not the headline, it is the name underneath it. And that is why this piece by Robert Kagan matters so much. Now, for viewers who may not know him, Robert Kagan is not some critic of American power sitting outside the system. Quite the opposite. For more than 2 decades, he has been one of the loudest and most influential defenders of aggressive American global leadership. He was among the strongest intellectual supporters of the Iraq War. He consistently argued that the US must use military power to shape the world rather than simply react to it. In one of his most famous arguments, Kagan rejected the idea that diplomacy alone keeps the order in the world. He wrote, and I quote, "The United States uses force because it can. Europe uses diplomacy because it cannot." That sentence became famous in Washington foreign policy circles because it perfectly captured his worldview. Hard power matters. Military dominance matters. American strength keeps order. This is all he said. And after 9/11, Kagan strongly backed interventionist policies across the Middle East. During the Iraq War debate, he argued that American power had to be used decisively against hostile regimes and warned repeatedly that weaknesses or retreat would damage America's global credibility. So when someone with that background writes an article in the Atlantic magazine titled "Checkmate in Iran," people in Washington and elsewhere notice. Because when hawks start sounding pessimistic, it usually means something serious has changed. And the core argument of this article is indeed startling. Kagan is essentially saying that the US may already have lost this war strategically, even if it won many battles tactically. He writes, "Defeat for the United States is not only possible, but likely." That's an extraordinary sentence coming from a man who spent years arguing that American military superiority could shape global outcomes. America and Israel used massive force here in Iran. They struck military targets across Iran, damaged infrastructure, killed commanders, and still failed to achieve the main objective. Iran did not collapse. The regime survived. The Strait of Hormuz remains contested and closed. And Washington now looks trapped between escalation and retreat. Kagan's argument is that this is no longer a normal military problem, it is becoming a credibility problem. At one point he writes that the war has exposed an America that looks unreliable and incapable of finishing what it started. And that matters because superpowers depend not only on weapons but on perception. Countries follow power when they believe that power can impose outcomes. But when the world watches the strongest military on earth spend weeks attacking a regional power without forcing surrender, then allies begin asking questions and rivals begin drawing conclusions. Kagan believes the consequences go far beyond Iran. He argues that Gulf states may now begin adjusting themselves around Tehran rather than Washington. China and Russia gain influence, America's allies in Asia and Europe start questioning American staying power. And then he delivers a very important line. He says, "If this isn't checkmate, it's close." That is not the language of confidence, that is the language of strategic exhaustion. Now, this does not mean that America suddenly disappears as a global power. Of course not. The US remains militarily and economically dominant in many ways, but Kagan's warning is about something deeper. He is saying the age of unquestioned American hegemony may be starting to crack, not in theory, in front of the world. And that is why this article really has made people notice. Not because a critic wrote it, but because someone who believed in American power, he wrote it. A man who spent much of his life arguing for American force is now openly warning that force has reached its limits. And when people like Robert Kagan begin talking about defeat, then perhaps the writing really is on the wall, not just for this war, but for an entire era.